Kia ora tātou, welcome back everybody, and just apologies to people that were waiting. We just had to get through an urgent part 2 item. Right, continuing on with our order of business is number 2 around notification of additional items. I haven't received anything, there's nothing from the floor. Okay, we will move on to number 3, declarations of interest. And again, nothing has been brought to my attention, nothing from the floor. All right, we'll move through to our public presentations, and a warm welcome to Manawatu Rugby, and invite Tim Myers, the chair of Manawatu Rugby, and I think Andrea Jackson, who will CE to speak, and there's a number of others in the background there. Welcome. So, Tim, I think you've been up here before. You know the button. If you wish to speak, perhaps pushing the button. And because we have some people online, maybe just introduce yourselves and your group. That'd be great. Thank you.
Morena tātou, quite right, Mayor. I've had the privilege of presenting to you before in a different context today here in my role as chairman of Manawatu Rugby Union. Along with me, I have Andrea Jackson sitting next to me, who will speak shortly, Chief Executive of the Union, and my fellow directors, Carla Nanagara and Daniel Yosse, and also one of the management team, Kirsty, is here with us also. So I've been told we've got 7 minutes, which is pretty tight, so I'm going to hand over to Andrea straight away and let Andrea get on with the address, and at the appropriate time, I'll ask the others to comment. Thank you.
Morena and kia ora everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. Always nice to see you and to talk about rugby, sport and recreation in our community. I just wanted to share my hashtag for the year. So hashtag 2022 is the best is yet to come. I think we had a great season last year, but the work for Manawatu Rugby is only just beginning. I just wanted to share a couple of highlights with you. As Tim has acknowledged, we've seen some change in our governance, and just to welcome Carla and Daniel, and also Niraj, CEO of Toyota New Zealand, onto our board. That has strengthened that governance experience for our organisation. Just to acknowledge, we've had significant change at an operational level, and I've been really pleased with the recruitment that we have managed to make and the people we've managed to recruit into positions. And Kirsty McCarthy here, those that knew the organisation, is the souped up version of Martin Brady, and is our game development and operation manager for the organisation. Just some highlights that I'd like to share with you. Increased participation last year for our community game through to our performance end of the game, which was exceptional in a COVID year, which you will all know and be very aware of the challenges around. 16% increase in participation was fantastic, just close to that 5-5 number was fantastic. Particular area of pride for the union is our significant growth and continued growth in the women's rugby game, 47% increase, and on track for about 18% increase this year. I just wanted to acknowledge the pathway. Without community rugby, we don't have our Cyclones, and without our academy programs, our rep programs, we also don't have our Turbos. So for us, it's a gambit. We are that one whānau, one team. We provide our community rugby opportunities to then attract people to stay in our district, whether they are administrators like myself, or whether they are coaches or players, for example. Also, just to acknowledge, our Turbos had their first semi-final since 2019 here locally, which was a fantastic achievement for them. The game didn't go quite as well as we wanted to, leaving some of our players leaving us to head overseas with that extended COVID period. But our Cyclones smashed it again for the year, unbeaten, winning by 45 points in the final, and now playing in the Premiership. Again, just those strong Wahine Toa being leaders in our community and standing up and showing that they are leaders, that they're prepared to commit and give time, effort and energy to an amazing cause. I just wanted to also acknowledge the different thinking that Manawatu Rugby has done in the last year, and to acknowledge Mayor Grant Smith and the help that he has given us to get ourselves into the house. So we've removed from underneath the arena, and we're now in the house that the union has purchased next to the Performance Centre, which is great. It's helped us to make some operational savings, invest in our own assets, and contributes to that one whānau, one team. So we see all of those players day in, day out when they're coming in to wear our jerseys and play with pride. I also want to acknowledge the different thinking that we have. Yes, rugby is a game, but for us it's more than a game. And for the last 2 Cyclones games, we have taken food bank donations at the door to give to the local food bank, and in both of those games received over 40 bags of food that we can on-gift. So we believe our reach is rugby, but it's more than a game, and we contribute to the social wellbeing and the social impact of this community. I will pass over to fellow directors, but back to Tim also. Just one correction in the paper. The request was for $40,000 per year, and that was as a minimum request to cover operational costs, and noting that it is an unbudgeted item, but an unbudgeted item that would go back to a council cost centre. Thank you for the work that you do. I don't envy you. I know that you have a multitude of priorities within your community, and thanks for the support and commitment to date. I'll hand back to Tim. Kia ora.
Kia ora, AJ, thank you. AJ touched on it. We do have quite a different composition around the board table compared to years prior, and I think it is an excellent reflection of the way in which rugby, particularly in the Manawatu, is actually changing. Our focus is shifting away from sole focus on high performance, and as AJ has quite succinctly communicated, more of a focus on the things that we believe we can do in the communities that we touch. We think we have a very broad reach. The directorship composition for us is very exciting. We have a number of different perspectives. I'd like to invite Carla quickly, please, just to perhaps touch on some of her initial observations. Carla has been around the table now really for probably only a couple of meetings, so since the AGM back in March. But you might be interested in some of the things that Carla has observed over that time.
Kia ora no tātou katoa. Yes, look, I'm new to rugby governance. I have a history in cricket governance, principally. I'm also currently the interim general manager at Hockey Manawatu, so I have quite a good kind of oversight of community-based sport. I was previously a coroner, and I mention that because in that context, and particularly in the work investigating suicides and suicide prevention, I came to really see how important strong, healthy, connected families and communities are, and further to that, how important sport and organised sport is to the well-being of communities. And participation is incredibly important, but equally, organised sport and opportunities in sport are really important for the health of families and communities, for individuals whose families may not be strong, but who can then have, support from sports clubs and their sporting body. So I guess that's the lens that I bring to sports governance. It's been interesting at rugby. The reaction I got from people who heard that I'd been appointed to the rugby board was generally quite negative, saying that I would find it difficult because rugby has a bad reputation. I think that the reality within, around the board table and within the organisation is really different from the historical perception of what rugby is, what Turbos is. And I guess my concern in some respects is that Manawatu Rugby is being held to ransom by a negative history, and there isn't a really strong lens over the gains that have been made, even in the past 12 months around refocusing Manawatu Rugby to really understand its role at a community level, its potential. It's a very influential agency on the ground in the delivery of sport across a range of different community groups. We see that huge uptake of the game amongst girls, women and girls. When we talk about women, it's actually, young girls who need a pathway ahead of them. And I'm really proud that the Manawatu Union was the first in the country to take the Pride Pledge as well, with a really strong focus on us being an equitable, diverse and inclusive community. So that's a little, I guess, of how I see the role of Manawatu Rugby, and I feel very hopeful, of the future of the sport in Manawatu. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla. Alongside me, Daniel Yose. Daniel, any further comments?
Talofa, malo lava le suifua, mau malalangi mama. Greetings. I guess just from the union's perspective is that we're all about representation. We provide a pathway for all young women, young men, children, and obviously our semi and professional players as well. But at the end of the day, they're here to represent our city, and they're really proud of that. And I think as a union, we've also embraced the fact of diversity and inclusion. And I think that's just another step forward in terms of us being broader in terms of understanding what our community needs. And so just a short comment from me. The people that put on this jersey wear it with pride. And I'm very fortunate that I have a young man that puts on this jersey for Manawatu and runs out there, and he's all about putting pride back in the jersey. I think if we look around this table here, it's all about representation of our city. And I think that's important to the people that we represent as well. Thank you.
Kia ora. Daniel, thank you. I was hoping you were going to bring up the fact that your son is in the team. He's unquestionably one of the heroes of our community, and I think our community needs heroes. We need people that we look up to. We need people that we look to inspire us and perhaps ourselves to aspire to, and we certainly see that every Saturday morning. And I'll just conclude maybe with a couple of stats, and then perhaps if you have some questions, more than welcome. If you come down to Ongwe Park on any given Saturday morning during the season, you will see somewhere around 2,000 children playing rugby. Based on the statistics that I could find, the average household size in Manawatu is somewhere around 4. That means that on any given Saturday morning, there are close to 10,000 households directly connected to rugby. That's at the junior level. We have 5,500 registered players, meaning that somewhere around 20,000 households are directly connected to rugby. And we're really excited about that reach. AJ referred to some of the participation growth that we've been able to deliver over the last few years, and we are excited about the shift in direction, about the shift in focus, about our ability to further engage with the people inside our community. Yes, we are biased. Myself personally, biased. I believe rugby is the best vehicle to connect with the members of our community, and by focusing on inclusion, by focusing on the diversity that exists in our community, we're very excited about how we believe we can grow and extend our reach and deliver good. What you're hearing is a distinct shift away from focus on high performance. We acknowledge how influential and important high performance is. In fact, Provincial Union Rugby in New Zealand has a purpose that we've all agreed to, and that purpose is rugby for everybody. That's an inclusion, that's a diversity play. But equally, the second part of the purpose is to provide a pathway for those that want to keep going with their rugby. And at some point, if we're getting it right in our academy, we pass that baton on to Super Rugby and so on and so forth. That pathway is also equally important. But what we're communicating today is very much that focus on our ability to connect with our communities. And I think conservatively, it's fair to say that rugby touches approximately 20% of the constituents of Palmerston North City directly, and if we were to include grandparents, wider whānau, the number would be a lot higher than that. So we're certainly hoping for your favourable consideration of our request, and at this point I'll pause for questions should you have any. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim, and thank you others. There is a couple. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Tim, AJ, board members, for joining us this morning. I did have a couple of questions which are based on your attachment to item 6 in the agenda, in case you're wondering where I'm talking from. And there was a comment under discussion that saying specifically that you're seeking support towards venue costs. And Tim, I wondered if you were able to tell us, bearing in mind that some of this might be commercially sensitive, but what other steps you've taken as well as coming to council to seek to fill that gap?
You're talking about the budget gap that will exist, so the gap between what we've projected and where we think we'll end up at the end of the year.
And why you need support.
Yeah, so we're quite open about it. I mean, we have minutes that are public record, and in those minutes you will find that the Manawatu Rugby Union is at this point in time projecting to lose somewhere in the vicinity of $200,000. It's no coincidence that that number is almost directly related to some of the sponsorship income that we've lost over the last period of time. The steps we've taken to try and fill it, we are touching literally every stakeholder we can find in this city. And we have been successful actually in closing a number of new deals with sponsors. But you can appreciate that it's a big gap to fill. So we might approach a small to medium-sized business. We are very, very grateful for the support that they give us, but it will take a lot of those small to medium-sized businesses to support us at an appropriate level in order to close the gap. Of course, we're looking at the P&L. You know, we are running a very, very lean machine. We can't cut any further without compromising our ability to deliver rugby in this community. So we're coming at it from two approaches. I mean, the provincial union rugby is a break-even proposition. You know, we're wrestling with a P&L every single year. Occasionally, something unusual happens. You know, we sold a house a few years ago. You know, we invested in a house, we leveraged our partnerships, we built a house, we sold it. That was an unusual situation. Similarly, the pandemic has meant that some of our costs, our variable costs, those that are associated with delivering rugby, haven't been as high as what they normally would be. So we have delivered small surpluses. But in a normal year, it's a wrestle. You know, we're fighting the P&L. So we look at it from a cost perspective, we're looking at it from an income perspective. I don't believe there's anything more we can do on either without compromising our ability to deliver the game. Look, if it's sustained, we will have to look further, particularly into the cost side of the way we manage the business.
Thank you. And my second question was just in the proposal section. You talked about the continued economic benefit to the city and region. I wondered if you've been able to quantify that at all.
We haven't, but equally, we know that, you know, particularly if we get a good day, the surrounding businesses, particularly around the arena, and I think, you know, perhaps a great opportunity to leverage the investment that has been made.
Sorry, we're just being joined by Kate Bush here.
It's fine.
Sorry, Tim, what did you say? I couldn't hear that.
It doesn't feature on my ringtone list, but it's not a bad one. We believe that some of the things that we can bring to the arena are actually an excellent way of doubling down on the investment that has been made there. So, you know, we've now got a venue that we can be proud of. Equally, we think that the city can be proud of it too. So when we do stage a game, when we do get more people through the gate as a consequence of the investment that has been made, we know for certain that the surrounding businesses benefit. Some of our sponsors are those businesses, and we know that on game day they get an uplift. Equally, our ability to continue to sustain that type of economic activity in the community is 100% related to our ability to manage the P&L in the way that I was referring to earlier. We have to put a quality product out there. We know that gate take is down, so you know we're working hard with that. You heard AJ talk about free admission for the Cyclones games. Last year, free for children to any game, in fact, staged at the arena. Looking to contribute in other ways, and you heard about the food drive. The next cab off the rank in that space is second-hand sports gear. So the next Cyclones game, people will be encouraged to bring second-hand sports gear along as perhaps a way of contributing into those communities, into those households where second-hand sports gear will go a long way.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and thanks, Tim and board members. I'm just really interested, I guess, in the uptick in the players that has occurred, I guess, in recent times. Does the rugby union actually have like an outreach plan in terms of how you're actually going to actually continue with that momentum? And the second part of the question really is, I guess, what is the rugby union doing perhaps to attract people into rugby where perhaps cost might be a barrier?
Thank you. I'll answer the first question first. The union is going to benefit from some capital injection. And now I want to be really clear about the difference between operational expense and capital expense. So we are going to benefit from about a $1 million capital injection, which will be delivered by way of the Silver Lake deal, which some of you might be familiar with. That $1 million is going to arrive into the union's bank account. We will not be using that for operational expenditure. We will be using that money essentially as a nest egg that needs to grow. It needs to be there in 10 years' time, and it needs to be at a much higher level in 10 years' time. That's like an anchor. We're not going to be touching that. Equally, we will be identifying some of the strategic initiatives that we believe we need to do in order to answer that question, Pat. So the first thing is schools. We have a problem in the way in which rugby participation drops off once people leave junior clubs and enter the secondary school system. So we've actually employed a resource to focus specifically on that area of degrade and participation. And the second area, which is this is the shining light, unquestionably, is the uplift we're getting in the junior ranks. And it's a bit of a twofold story, which I'll quickly cover. The first is we're seeing a really statistically significant lift in the participation, particularly among young girls and across all walks of life. And so the clubs are making it as easy as they possibly can for young people to get involved in rugby. So registration fees, for example, somewhere around $25 to $30, which we think for 6 months worth of activity, associated activity, is actually pretty good value. I know, having served on a junior club committee for 7 years, that in many instances those registration fees are waived and simply covered by the union. We're trying to remove that cost barrier completely. So we're seeing this really strong uplift in the junior game. It's really important that those players, if they're not first or second 15 material, feel as though they've got a place in rugby once they get into schools. And equally, we know that the clubs have got to somehow keep track of those players as they go into the school system. So they enter the school system and then they go into this sort of black box for 5 years, or shorter, depending on how long they stay at school. We're focusing on making sure the clubs actually keep track of those players, so when they graduate from high school, they've got a contact. They've got a conduit back into the club, because that's where we're seeing the drop-off. So we see one drop-off as they enter secondary school, and then we see another drop-off as they leave school, because of that disconnect that now exists with the clubs that nurtured all of those really strong and encouraging numbers in the outset. So there's a number of quite tactical things that we can do, but it all requires funding. That is where we are investing the resource that we do have to focus on those areas. That's with respect to participation, with respect to numbers. Those are the two primary areas.
If I could just build on that, we've aligned the organisation to take leads in schools and leads in clubs as well, and we've also led the way as a provincial union to have diversity and inclusion role, which is the first in the country and something New Zealand Rugby are really interested in, and that role is around how do we connect with the migrant communities, being a migrant settlement community, so work in that space as well to support more non-traditional rugby playing communities, and what does rugby look like to non-traditional communities, not the game that we necessarily know. So how do we adapt our game and put that resource to that?
And that kind of touches on a comment that Carla made with respect to the reputation that rugby has had. It's a group of typically rugby-focused, more elderly males sitting around a table drinking beers and smoking cigarettes. Nothing could be further from the truth today. I look across the landscape, and I think we're not the finished article, but we're a lot closer than what we ever have been to being able to stand and sit in front of a group of people like yourselves and say that we are genuinely connecting with the various different parts of our community. And I think we're in much stronger shape than we ever have been.
Great, look, that's a really, really helpful bit of narrative. So can I just get some reassurance that from the Rugby Union as the central organisation and through the clubs, that thread is actually being, I guess, fed down through the clubs, so there's actually common thinking across the entire part of rugby in the Manawatu?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think how I answer that. We have identified that very risk as very central to the future of the game. Club rugby in a day gone by was so strong that the clubs could essentially stand alone themselves, and we had massive fragmentation. There was a distinct lack of respect between clubs and the union. You know, the union that is supposed to be the representative body of all clubs often found itself on the back foot, and you know, I say that not through direct experience, but through talking to some of the former directors that were around in the bad old days. Today, the club situation is very different. You know, clubs are not nearly as strong as they once were. The club administrators are very, very thankful, in most instances, of the support that they get from AJ and the team. I think the Silver Lake capital injection, which and a small part of which is going directly to clubs, is an excellent opportunity for clubs to sit around a table alongside AJ and the management team and you know, buzzword, but collaborate. You know, I think there's a great opportunity to actually deliver that synergistic effect. Now more than ever, there is a very strong awareness that whilst the clubs are unique, you know, they have to be unique, they're a flag for their local communities, and we want to encourage that friendly competitive rivalry. Equally, we're in this together, and the clubs themselves play a very, very important role in the collective approach to the way that we approach rugby in our communities and in the Manawatu. And we're seeing excellent response from the clubs themselves. And that will continue to be a focus for AJ and the team.
Again, just an add-on, we a week ago facilitated a workshop with Kia Toa Club, and it was around the same issue. So it was, you know, we're not the fountain of all knowledge, and so we facilitated a workshop saying, what are the challenges you face, how do we go about it, and who's going to do what, and come back together around that secondary school challenge. New Zealand Rugby has definitely identified it. It's a strategic piece of work in their area as well. So we facilitate down the information from New Zealand Rugby, and we are with our clubs on the ground hearing what the challenges are for them, and Kia Toa was a great example of that.
Some things will need to be distributed, some things will need to be centralised. So we want to provide centralised support, but we're acknowledging that actually the strength and the collective insight that comes from our clubs is vitally important to making the right decisions for rugby in Manawatu.
Great, thanks. That's very helpful. You'll have to excuse me for trying to tease that out, but I think it's important that we actually, I guess, understand the social benefits. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Right, councillors, we're well over time, but I've got a couple that have been waiting a long time to ask a question, so if we could make it brief, please. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Tim and Andrea, and Carl and everyone. My question is really about the longer term, medium to longer term. How are you going to be financially sustainable? Because if council puts in money for the next 5 years, what's going to happen then?
Yeah, are you simply patching up a hole on the hull of a boat that is going to simply reappear next year? A couple of things. So I'll talk about the balance sheet first, and I'm aware we are over time. Balance sheet strength has doubled, which means that the equity that the union has doubled in the space of 5 years. That's been a consequence of quite diligent and careful investment. AJ referred to, first of all, the gym, the high performance centre, and secondly, the house that we've purchased directly adjacent. We had an initial objective of $1 million worth of equity. Today we're somewhere around 2. The balance sheet has never been stronger. So from a balance sheet perspective, the union is in exceptionally good shape, careful, well-considered investment over a number of years, decade or more. The P&L is where the problem is. You know, our cash flow is an issue. So today and right now, the problem is essentially being driven by the loss of a major sponsor. We will get a new major sponsor. It just so happened that this year, you know, we're out of time. You know, the Cyclone season is 3 games deep. Quite difficult to secure a front of jersey sponsor, given that nearly half the season's already gone. Same applies the turbos. We're sort of out of time on the FOJ sponsor. With a front of jersey sponsor, the hole will be filled. You know, we don't see it as our as a primary objective to deliver huge operating surpluses every year. You know, that's not what we're about. We're about making sure we've got adequate funding to support the resources that we need in rugby. So, in a normal year, the union is not a loss-making entity. In a normal year, when we've got a front of jersey sponsor, we're positive to the tune of 100,000 or 200,000. Last year it was higher at 6, but anomaly on the basis that the pandemic meant we didn't have to deliver rugby to the same degree we normally do. So it is, the union is a going concern, but equally, in a normal year, the union makes money. You know, we're not a basket case by any extent.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, your plan for sustainability is to find another front of jersey sponsor, is that correct?
Yeah, well, there are 3 primary revenue streams, and this applies across the board for any provincial union. One is trust funding, one is ticket sales, which is sort of connected, I suppose. Connected more to sponsors. The gate take is something that's now almost irrelevant. However, it's still meaningful. You know, there's still tens of thousands of dollars there that end up on the top line of the P&L each year. The third is income that we receive from our commercial sponsors. And then the fourth is the funding that we get from New Zealand Rugby. And that will actually improve as well as a consequence of the Silver Lake deal. So the funding we get from New Zealand Rugby, just coincidentally, is going to be about $200,000 higher from next year onwards, now that the Silver Lake transaction has been concluded. If that level of funding was in play today, the union would be breaking even. That level of funding is not going to decrease. So we've actually got some really strong anchor funding now, which will set the union off on a much better financial footing for the foreseeable future. You know, that number is only going to go up. If the Silver Lake deal does what it's meant to do, which is improve revenue for New Zealand Rugby, then provincial unions will benefit proportionally. We're working off the most conservative figure possible. Trust funding is under a bit of pressure. The various things that are influencing decisions at that level have changed a little bit, but equally they're still a very, very important part of our income. And then thirdly, if we exclude gate take, third is commercial sponsorship, and that is sustainable, we believe, even though there's a bit of pressure on it this year as a consequence of the FOJ situation.
Okay, thank you.
And finally, Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Tim, colleagues, and Andrea as well for being here. I suppose the picture that's building up in my mind is one of a short-term issue in the finances that potentially might be as short as 12 months. And I'm trying to understand from that then the rationale of an ask that's over 5 years, whereas it sounds that a number of things coming in the pipeline might actually contribute significantly to financial flows, perhaps as soon as 12 months away.
So the question as to whether or not the council...
I guess the question is trying to understand the justification around a multi-year ask when it sounds like we've got perhaps a one-year issue.
Yeah, so the multi-year request is primarily driven by our desire to have surety of income rather than sort of reactive conversations every year. So surety of income is something that enables us to plan over the medium to long term as well as meet the short-term requirements. As much as I'm communicating financial sustainability, I have also mentioned that it's a battle. You know, we wrestle with the P&L every year. There is literally no fat. If we do manage to deliver a surplus, it's because of very careful cost management as opposed to an increase on the income side. So we're looking to establish something that is more sustainable than what we've got today, even though we believe that the union does present a financially sound proposition.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Thank you, everybody, and thanks to those councillors that bailed out of we had a big long list there of questions, so I was getting a little bit concerned. Thank you, Tim and others. Appreciate your presentation to us. Thank you. We're going to receive the officer's report in a moment, so please stay around if you wish to hear that. So, councillors, we now will resolve to accept the presentation be received for information. I'll look to move that, seconded by Councillor Bowen. No comments? Right, we will vote, please. Thank you. And that is passed unanimously, 13 votes to none. Thank you. I'm just going to change the order of the agenda, so I'll now ask that we look to go to the paper around the request for support for Manawatu Rugby, and I'll ask Jessica Ballinger, our marketing manager, to come forward and speak to that, please. That's page 31 of your papers, councillors. Jess, welcome.
Morning, councillors. I will take the report as read and open for questions.
Thank you. All right. I'll open it up for any questions. Councillor Naylor.
Thanks, Jessica. Just in terms of the report describes the applications that were made and the fact that they didn't meet the criteria. It talks about that's specifically around delivering new or initiatives. Is that 50,000 fund usually fully allocated?
Yes, we've seen quite a big uptake in the fund already. I highly expect it to be utilised very quickly.
Okay, so I'm assuming that anything that's approved today would be unbudgeted expense then?
Yes, it would be.
Okay, now page 39 under the proposal, in that first paragraph under proposal talks about equity with the Manawatu Jets who had sought similar costs in proposal to council. Do you have any understanding of how many sports might be interested in requesting this sort of support as a result of, if we were to approve this today and have approved the Manawatu Jets, do you know how many sports potentially could be interested in seeking further funds from council?
No, I don't have that information with me, no.
Okay.
No.
Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Jessica. Are there any other funds that council holds that we could direct this request to, given that it seems that the request has come in but not met the criteria of this particular fund? Are there other funds that could be looked at?
This was the most appropriate fund for them to apply to. There is a lot of funds that council holds, but yeah, this was the best one for them to apply to.
Okay, that's not quite answering my question. So there are no other funds that they could apply to?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Jessica. It was a question, I think, following on from Councillor Naylor's point about the applications to the fund. And I noted they didn't meet the fund criteria that Councillor Naylor referred to, but then in AJ's presentation, she talked about their work in diversity and inclusion, and that sounded to me like that was new and innovative. So why didn't that meet the standard?
So that wasn't included in the initial application. So we based the initial application on what was given to us. That wasn't included in it, but yes, yeah. So that information around the diversity stuff wasn't included in the initial application that was done through online applications.
So would that have been the kind of thing that would have met the criteria?
So we do the criteria. So the criteria is based on 3-panel judgments. So I can only talk to my own judgment. Personally, I think yes. I think that is a new and innovative way to do things. Absolutely, yes.
Okay, thank you. And I just had a second question, just really about the process for this report coming to council. Because
Yes.
There are 3 criteria for elevating the conversation, and one of them was about a quantifiable disadvantage. Now, and I asked the question about the quantifiable advantage, which the rugby union weren't able to quantify.
Yes.
And you've also said you can't quantify a disadvantage, which would seem to suggest it doesn't meet the criteria for escalation. So why have we escalated it?
So we do see that there is a reputational disadvantage, and reputational is very difficult to quantify, but that disadvantage we felt was still appropriate to come to council and to share this report with you. So yes, I understand that the quantifiable element was missed, but there is a reputational disadvantage that we felt we needed to bring to council.
Okay, thank you, Jess.
No worries.
I'll just ask the CE to comment just regards around that question around different funds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, so just in terms of a bit of context and background, in terms of if council decided they did want to support this, probably the easier way to support something for rugby is through the venue fees that they pay us. Now, which was sort of talked about in their proposal, there are a number of costs in there that we don't really have a lot of control over. They pay us so we can pay someone else, and it would be very hard for us to do much in that regard. But the one thing that we probably do have some control on is the $5,000 a game venue fee. That is something that we would still need to account for, because it would come off basically our revenue line for the arena, but that is something that it's outside the actual funds that we have for sponsorship or anything like that, but that is where we would have some flexibility if you did want to do something.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Jess, for being here to answer some questions for us. A couple just around the wording of the recommendations. Recommendation 2 makes reference to a new entity. I was trying to understand what that is, just in the first line of it there.
Sorry, 2A?
No, just the headline for 2, if the decision is to provide financial sponsorship to the new entity, and I just wondered
Oh, apologies.
if that was intended or
no,
what's...
No, that's a mistake. Apologies. No, that's a mistake.
Right. Secondly, just wanted to understand in 2B, where it makes reference to budgets are adjusted to account for the additional cost. What does that mean? Are we taking money from somebody else? Are we borrowing additional money? What would actually happen?
So I'd probably look to this to the Chief Financial Officer, if I could, to speak to that question.
Sorry, through me. Could the question just be repeated?
Certainly. Thanks, Cam. The question relates to recommendation 2B on the papers, where it makes reference to budgets are adjusted to account for the additional cost. And I was trying to understand, are we intending to meet that by rearrangement then within existing budgets and kind of taking from somewhere else? Or are we talking about borrowing some money to cover the cost?
The intent would be, if at all possible, to rearrange from existing budgets. So that could be either from other expenditure budgets, or if we think we're going to have a additional revenue that above what we had planned, and we'd probably look at the venue space in the first instance for that, given that it's sort of in that realm.
So I'm hearing hopeful that we can cover it. If those hopes don't eventuate, then where does the money come from?
If that doesn't eventuate, then the mechanism is that feeds into a deficit for the year, so that then comes out of debt. But I'm hopeful and reasonably confident that we'd be able to cover that.
Thank you. Final question, Mr. Mayor, is just around understanding from an officer's point of view, kind of if the value proposition changes if we go with a, let's say for argument's sake, a single year of funding, and then, allow us to revisit any further years in a year's time. Does that kind of change the value proposition at all if we consider it from that perspective?
I don't have that. I don't know at the moment. I'd have to have a look at it, to be fair. I think if you go, that would be a question to Manawatu Rugby Union, whether or not 1 year would be suffice. rather than the 5-year sponsorship. Does that answer your question? Apologies.
Well, I guess in terms of the benefits that you're envisaging from a council point of view,
Yeah.
does that change if we look at it in a single-year lens versus a multi-year lens?
No, I don't think so, no.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor.
Online, Councillor Butt.
My question has already been answered, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'm not sure really how to couch this question, I guess, but can somebody just remind us what our agreement was with the Jets? I'm just trying to sort of figure out sort of the parity that we've had.
So it was venue costs, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we might just need to double check the actual value, but it was for 5 years. Sorry, John? 35,000 for 5 years. Could you just grab a microphone, please, John? Or come up to the, yeah.
Good morning, councillors. It's $35,000 per year because that covers up to 12 games that could be held as home games throughout an NBL season.
And that was for 5 years?
That was for 5 years, which is reviewed after the 4th year,
right.
Retrospectively.
Okay, thank you. Does that help, councillor?
Yep, thanks.
Okay. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one further follow-up question regarding the applications. The paper said that there were 5 applications that were declined, and in answer to Councillor Bowen's question, it sounds like if there had been some further information provided, that might have changed the outcome. I'm just wondering, were they 5 applications over a period of time, or were they all the same? And was there any feedback provided as to how they could perhaps better meet that criteria in between applications?
So each application was a game, so they took it from that perspective. We did meet with MRU, the head of marketing and comms, and I did meet with them to discuss their application. Due to the nature of timing and making it to this reporting council, we felt that we gave them feedback for this element rather than those applications, because their applications were higher than what the fund has anyway. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, no further questions. So thank you, Jess. Thank you, John. We'll get the recommendations up, and I'm going to look to the room. What the feeling of the Councillor Dennison?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am happy to move the option 1, which is to fund the request for $40,000 per year for the next 5 years, and look for a seconder before I continue.
Councillor Finlay, thank you.
Thank you. Reasonable request in a sport that's had injection from Silver Lake for the community game, the development of the women's game with the success that's been attained with representation at the highest level from both the men and the women's game. Their proactiveness around getting a higher engine room in their governance being reflected today, their investment into their asset base, which is now much stronger, best it's ever been. And then really what's needed now, and because we have gone through a season of COVID, it's fairly understandable some of the major sponsors having to readjust just in this environment. And for the city to take its place, to back a team that's a lot of people have held a lot of pride in over decades. And so to see it through in its transitioning, I see it's a very reasonable request. Again, our costs, we can subsidise a lot of it's part of our facility operation, and they've been using that as their home base, which really is a profile. They get a lot of TV coverage around the country. The Turbos and the Cyclones are well recognised as our representative teams, and so I have no problem in endorsing support for this during this time of COVID, and with the support of other sponsorship through the New Zealand Rugby Union. So I'm very comfortable. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I had no hesitation whatsoever in seconding this. You imagine what would happen to Palmerston North if by a slight bit of luck we managed to bring home the Ranfurly Shield this year. All things are possible. We're allowed to dream. But if we don't support the Manawatu Rugby Union, it ain't going to come here. I live for the day where we have a parade and the Ranfurly Shield's dragged around the square. But if we don't support the Rugby Union, that's not going to happen. The return to this city, if that happened, would be phenomenal. Especially if look at what happened back in the 70s. This town buzzed while we had the Ranfurly Shield. If there was such a competition in New Zealand as a state of origin, do you realise Manawatu would be one of the strongest teams in the country, with probably more All Blacks than anywhere else? We produce some of the greatest rugby players of all time from this province, and we need to support our rugby union. I'm a dreamer, and I believe in rugby, because I've seen how many lives it can change. And you just look at the numbers of the young people that are going to rugby, increasing numbers. Not just boys nowadays, but girls as well. I think $40,000 a year, it's a great, great investment into the future of our young people and into our city. So I totally support it.
Councillor Harper.
Thank you, and thank you to Manawatu Rugby for coming in today, to the board members and to AJ. I fully support this recommendation. I think for a council to not support it would be the wrong thing to do today. I think well done for the board coming in today and giving us their warts and all. I think it's hard to do that, and it's hard to come in and face us, but thank you for doing that. And I think as a council we support what you have done. I think we've supported the Jets, and I think we should support Manawatu Rugby in the same way that we have supported the Jets. So in the same vein as what Councillor Dennison and Councillor Finlay, I won't repeat what they have said, but I just wanted to show you that I support you in the same way. So thank you for coming in.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm not repeating what people have said here for the dreaming and the believing and all the good things that rugby are doing, but I think I'm only here for 1 year of that. I think the answers to questions say there is an immediate need, but 5 years, I believe in your ability to fix that problem for yourself. So I'm happy for us to step into the gap and happy to support you going forward, but I think $40,000 for 1 year would do that. So, Mr Mayor, I'd like to seek support to move that the item 1 becomes a one-off payment of $40,000 and that we delete 2C. I'll seek a seconder for that amendment.
Okay, Councillor Naylor will second that.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's an amendment. Okay. Just give us a moment to sort that. Okay, so we've got the amendments which we will now move to. And so Councillor Bowen, is that what you were? Okay, that's great. Now, does anybody wish to speak to this particular? So Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm not sure if it needs to be specified, the request of 40,000 for 1 year or not, but I'm very happy to support this amendment. There's absolutely no doubt that sport benefits our community in a variety of ways, and I want to acknowledge the work of the Manawatu Rugby Union for all the reasons that have been outlined by others. However, we are in really challenging financial times, and our ratepayers simply can't compensate for all the losses in sponsorship going forward. And asking for 200,000 for one sport, I just think we set ourselves up. We set a precedent for other sports, and that could be very costly. And I think we're not in a financial position at the moment to be supporting sport to that level. We invest significantly in sports already as a council. We fund Sport Manawatu, we fund facilities and fields. There is sports event funding available, and I understand that there have been some applications that have been declined. So I think I would like to see the work progress that has been outlined this morning. I think a 1 year allocation addresses the immediate concerns and allows some time for that further seeking of sponsorship. I think this is a pragmatic and responsible approach.
Anybody else wishing to speak to this? Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'm very happy to support the 1 year request. And I think in questioning it became quite clear that there's an urgent need for this year because of a predicted deficit, but that things are definitely looking up in the outer years. And I don't want to commit us at this stage to 5 years of expenditure, which is a significant unbudgeted amount. I'd be open to looking at this again in a year's time if something untoward happens and the rugby union isn't able to find a sponsor. But I do think that at this stage, a 1 year allowance is all that I really want to agree to. Yes, we do want to be supporting sport in our community, and yes, we don't want to see a flagship team be disadvantaged because of the loss of a sponsor. But at the same time, we're trying to make decisions around budgets for essential items for the whole community, and we need to have some balance in our decision making. And I'm just not comfortable to fund 200,000 at this stage. I am glad, though, that this decision did come to council, because I think it's important when groups don't quite fit the criteria for a fund, and there is significant risk to them if they don't get that money. I think it's right that it comes to council for a consideration and decision making. So I'm glad that the process is working, and I do ask you to support the 1 year funding. It doesn't mean that we wouldn't fund for further years, but it would mean that it would require the rugby union to come back to us and give us an update on their finances, and I think that that's only reasonable. So I'd ask you to support the 1 year funding at this stage. Thanks.
Are there any other councillors wish to go? I've got a number of you here, but I know you don't really want to speak to this. So is there, you want to speak to the substantive or the former? So Councillor Barrett, you're waving your arms.
Indeed. Thank you, Mr Mayor. I did wish to speak to the amendment, which I do fully support. Would put some context around that to say rugby is something that I don't understand, but I do understand the value of rugby to the community, and I think that came through very, very clearly. And one of the main reasons, in addition to what has already been spoken about, for me to urge you to support the 1 year approach is that we actually heard through questioning that there was a start of a conversation there about actually looking at where we could be aligning the proposals coming in with the actual funding criteria, which are quite new. And, you know, I can imagine the challenges that the rugby union faced, because we were in the middle of consulting with the community, landing and actually deciding where that funding policy was going to go. At the same time, they're trying to figure out how they can get some funds. And I think now that funding policy sits there, has some very clear criteria around what we want to be seeing coming through those funding processes, that is the way to look to the future for Manawatu Rugby Union, is to think about where within the existing pools of funding they can better align. In the short term, there is definitely a need, and I want us to be supporting that fully, and I think that what we have in front of us for a single year gives us really the best of both worlds, making sure that the rugby union has the support they need now, but giving the union and council the chance to work through established funding channels for any future needs, pending the other revenue streams we've heard about coming online, hopefully in the near term for the union. So absolutely in support of the one-year approach here, and would urge colleagues to take that same approach.
Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Look, I just want a little bit of clarity, just and perhaps we can get an answer for this. It's just really around, I think I read in the paper there that they work their funding from January to December. So just some reassurance that perhaps for this year they're actually okay, so we're looking for 2023. So I just really want to make sure we've got clarity on that.
No, I don't think that is right, but can an officer answer that? They're seeking the money now. Yes, we're getting nods.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else wishing to speak? All right, before I go back to the right of reply, I'll just comment. Look, all the comments that have been made are fair and reasonable. I suppose there was one that we were talking about other sports will come with setting a precedent. We've already set a precedent. And I realise some of you didn't vote for that, but we've already done that. There are only 2 true National League organisations in our city. You just got to be really upfront about that. Yes, we're represented in other codes, but they're more regional teams that have a far greater reach than just the city and Manawatu. And with I thought the case that was put forward was really compelling, and I congratulate Manawatu Rugby, and it came from quite different angles too. The Turbos, the Cyclones and the Jets are our true city teams. If we don't support them, I think we're going to be a lot poorer. And it's not just the sport side. I think we heard the social side, but actually there's a reputational and a city profile side as well. If we want to be fair and equitable, I've been on the other side of the fence, and I know how hard it is to come in here, get it for 1 year, and then come back again. And there might be different people around the room too, of course. It becomes harder and harder, and you're just living from literally month to month, in this case year to year. I'm not unhappy if this passes, because I think that's positive as well, but I would favour the 5-year, and perhaps with the mover and the seconder of the 5-year one would put a review at 3 years, I would perhaps be a little bit more happier with that. So I'm not going to support the amendment, because I do think we need to tease this out a little bit more, but again, I'm not unhappy if it does pass, if you read my thinking. Okay, back to you, Councillor Bowen, for the right of reply.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it should be taken as really encouraging to the union that we're not talking about if we support you. We're talking about how best we can do that in the constrained position that we're in at the moment. No question that this council supports the work that you do for your successes or otherwise on the field, but for the very real impact that you have in our community. And I was particularly interested to hear about that innovative way of working in diversity and inclusion, and particularly that reach into non-traditional rugby communities. I think there's an awful lot of good work going on there, and I think that will find a natural home in our new sponsorship fund criteria. And of course, the annual budget is always there as well for submissions through that. So I'm absolutely not signalling by this that we wouldn't look to support you in the best and most appropriate way we can, bearing in mind the constraints we have on the spending of public money. But I'd ask colleagues to support this one-off funding to meet the very real gap that you're facing at the moment, and then we can look at how best that goes forward and officers can take that through the sponsorship fund and other routes. I think this is a pragmatic step and an affordable step in the current climate, and I ask for your support for it. Thank you.
All right, thank you, councillors. We will now vote on the amendment, which is in front of us. Thank you. And that is passed, 8 votes for and 5 against. All right. Okay, so thank you, councillors. We may break now, I think, while we've... Oh, sorry. You can tell I haven't done this for a little while. All right, we need to move the substantive. Okay, and that's the request for the support for Manawatu Rugby that the council resolves that council approves option 1, fund the request of $40,000 for 1 year. 2, that council agrees the CE right to Manawatu Rugby, confirming the council's decision, and that the unbudgeted spending of $40,000 in the 2022-23 year is approved, and the budgets are adjusted to account for the additional cost. I'll leave that obviously to the CE and the CFO. That's moved by Councillor Dennison, Councillor Finlay. All right. We will vote on that, please. And that has passed, 13 votes for, none against. Thank you. We will now break and back into the chamber at 11:15. Thank you. Kia ora tātou, welcome back. And councillors, will now move to our agenda number 7. Sorry, no, I'll go back. Number 5, which is the confirmation of the minutes. That council resolves that the minutes of the council meeting of the 29th of June 2022, Part 1 Public, be confirmed as a true and correct record. I'll look to move those. Seconded by Councillor Hancock, thank you. Are there any matters arising? There being none, we will look to vote, please. That is passed, 12 votes for, none against. Thank you, councillors. Right, we move through to the reports and back to where I started, number 7, the Ferguson...
Excuse me, Mr Mayor, sorry to interrupt. Have we got the online people back on? Because we're a vote missing. Should have 13.
He's just joined us
Okay,
now.
cool, thank you.
Sorry, I heard that out of the corner there that he just joined. So we now move to number 7, which is the Ferguson Street, Pitt Street intersection upgrade and the safety enhancements. I invite Hamish, our Transport and Development Manager, and page 41 of your papers, councillors. Hamish, welcome.
Thank you, and good morning, Mr Mayor and councillors. Nice to see you back again. So this report is, I'll take it as read, it's basically just to present the option to install a pedestrian crossing as part of the Pitt-Ferg upgrade project. Thank you.
Thank you, Hamish. Are there any questions, councillors? There being none. Oh, sorry, there is. Sorry, you want to move it? Okay, thank you, Councillor Harper. Moved by Councillor Harper, seconded by Councillor Johnson. That's pretty quick, Hamish, thank you.
Thank you.
So, look, I'll open it up now. I'll go to Councillor Harper. Do you wish to speak to this? Any further comments? Open up for comments. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Briefly, I think we all agreed to this earlier, and my recollection is that it was Councillor Beattie that put up the budget. It's come back in under budget, and so I see this as just being a very quick approval process. Thank you.
Okay. No right of reply? We will vote. And that has passed 14 votes for and none against. Thank you. Right, we move through now to number 8 on our order paper, and this is around submission to the Water Services Entities Bill. We have a memo there from Sarah, our Chief Infrastructure Officer, page 49 of your papers. Sarah.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, Deputy Mayor, councillors. I'm happy to take the submission as read and answer any questions.
Thank you, Sarah. Are there any questions, councillors? I will ask one. This actually has been sent, hasn't it?
Through the chair, yes, Mr Mayor, it has been sent.
Yep. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Sarah. I was just wanting to clarify, obviously, the timing of not having council meetings in July may have contributed to it, but just how we are in the situation where we're a number of days past the submission, and was it just, was there any way that it could have been brought to us prior to submission in June or earlier?
Through the chair, it did go out to councillors as an email with a very small amount of notice, but it did go out to councillors as an email. I think it just happened to be at the same time as all of the other things like end of year. So
Thank you. I do recall it coming around as an email. I
Yeah.
guess what I'm trying to understand is why it didn't come to council as an agenda item.
Through you, Mr. Chair, one of the challenges that we have with water reform generally is the timeframes that they give us to respond, which are particularly challenging. That there just wasn't time to write a response and bring it to the chamber. We fully recognise that would have been a better situation, but the timeframe that we were given was inadequate.
Thank you. So I'm just referring to the parliamentary site here. So it talks about introduction 2nd June, first reading 9 June, submissions due 22 July. So basically what you're saying is that from that 2nd of June there wasn't sufficient time.
Yes, not least because of the work that was being done by Taitura and LGNZ, thank you, to formulate joint submissions through that time, which we were also responding to.
So was the priority around LGNZ's submission and informing that, or was it around having the City Council's direct submission?
Through the Chair, no, to clarify, those responses were quite comprehensive, so our response was additional to those, rather than repeating the same things.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Bowen, you're in the queue, you're out.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's a very small question, Sarah. It was just a point under governance where you're talking about the proposed governance structure, and you said it's not clear whether this will work well, but you don't expand on what your concerns are in that space, and I wondered if you'd like to tell us.
Through the Chair, it's simply because it's a very complicated governance structure. The structure leading to sort of who informs the chief exec, who sets direction, how our governance bodies are involved is incredibly complicated at the moment, and there are a number of steps or breaks in between some of the potential voices and the end listener. So it's not clear from that perspective whether it will work well in its current form.
Thank you.
That's how we get the views up.
Yeah. Okay, I'm not sure what's happening there. There's some sort of recording going on in the background. Okay, are there any further questions of the officer? And nothing online? Okay, thank you, Sarah. That's great. All right, we will get the recommendation up. Our submission to the Water Services Entities Bill, that Council resolves that Council note the submission to the Water Services Entity Bill. I'm happy to move that. Seconded by Councillor Bowen. Any comments? Probably Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We'll take the opportunity to comment. Obviously, my line of questioning indicated a little bit of perhaps frustration around the timing and kind of having to see this after the fact. But I think my more, substantive frustration around this is that while the submission that has been lodged, identifies a number of reasonably minor but important areas of improvement throughout the bill, it doesn't actually address the substantive question, which I don't feel we've ever addressed as a council, of whether or not overall Three Waters reform is a direction of travel that we and the community we represent are comfortable with. And I guess I'm disappointed to see that now we're kind of drifting into a space where we're now providing detailed comment around potentially how you shape this without ever having had a substantive debate around fundamentally whether this is something that does serve our community well. And I think that's a debate that would be worth having regardless of the ultimate outcome. We would recognize that as a local council, we only have limited ability to influence government direction. But yeah, the longer this has gone, the more disappointing and frustrating that's been. I think it's almost a year since I put something out in the media kind of expressing my frustration and concerns with the overall reform package, and to see it just kind of continue to drift through council process without substantial debate does frustrate me to some extent. I think it's, you know, buying into something that probably doesn't play that well in the future. It's setting up a really big bureaucracy. It's going to be quite disruptive to the community and quite disempowering of community as well. I'm not really happy to be in a position now where we haven't actually had a substantive at this council and a substantive engagement with our community around their views on this. So probably lodge a protest vote against.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think Councillor Barrett's actually made a very pertinent point around that we haven't had the opportunity to engage with our community, get the wider views. And there is a mix of views, and their voice has not been heard around their disapproval of having the Three Waters taken off local authorities into new entities. And as a councillor, I felt disempowered when we thought that we were going to have an opt-in, opt-out type of option, and all we did is request more information to pause and hold to get considered direction forward to propose, to engage with our community, and that opportunity was taken from us. And so that was frustrating. And so even now I feel like we haven't got the information to even work out if it's the right way forward. I think in the short term there might be some cost savings in the new structure which has been assessed, but longer term I can only see those costs being increased, and then local authorities absorbing that headroom in their budgets. So the outcome for residents potentially could be a lot more outgoings for water and for rates. And so I think that's a very long-term poor outcome ultimately. So a bit like Councillor Barrett's protest vote, I think it's prompted me to consider now to speak up and to put my position that I've been a lack of approval on the way this has all been handled. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else wishing to speak? All right, I'll sum up. Look, councillors, I don't disagree with you in some of your comments. Do we agree that something needs to change? I think that's probably a resounding yes. Do we agree with the process and what has been termed as the ongoing bureaucracy and some of the complexity which we've actually identified in our submission? I'd say, do we agree with that? No. I think it's become more unwieldy the longer this has gone on. As a council, we've generally looked after waters, our Three Waters, very, very well. But we are the first cab off the rank with the new standards, the new legislative requirements, which are quite immense, and a very, very different starting position to where we were even 3 years ago. And our city will be the first of the guinea pigs. And could we do that by ourselves? Don't think so. So rather selfishly, well, I think we do need to support this. Otherwise, we won't have a new wastewater plant. Certainly, we won't be building it. So there is a call to we do need to support this for our own city. So we will be speaking to this at the Select Committee, but I do encourage you to support this motion to at least get the discussion going. I'd have to say I'm not sure whether it's a fait accompli by any means yet. And Councillor Barrett's right. We should have had this in a more debated this perhaps rather than just noting this as a submission. It would be fair to say other councils are in the same position as well. I've noted in the media that there's been a raft of different councils that have put their submissions forward just in the last few days of last week. So we're all in the same boat in that sense. So I'll ask you to vote, please. And that has passed 8 votes for, 5 against and 1 abstention. All right.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, sorry. There's only 4 no votes on there?
Okay, we'll have that, excuse me, we'll have that captured properly in the minutes. Apologies. It's quite an important one to actually note.
Yeah, so if we could just note who voted which way, I think that's quite important. In the minutes? Okay.
We can circulate that. I'll ask officers to circulate that later today, please, just because of the importance of it. Okay, councillors, moving on to number 9, which is our council work schedule, page 55. And any comments, questions of officers on that? There being none, a lot of it's forward thinking. I'll look to move it, seconded by Councillor Hancock, and ask you to vote, please. Has passed, 13 votes for and none against. I'll now look to go into part 2, and for the reasons of commercial sensitivity, and I'll look to move that. I have a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Dennison. Being no comments, questions to that, we'll ask you to vote, please. And that has passed, 13 votes for and none against. Thank you. Right, we will just a couple of minutes while we steady things.